Thick briars and towering hedges wove a daunting labyrinth, their gnarled branches reaching skyward as if in silent protest of the centuries that had passed. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the overgrowth, illuminating a narrow dirt path. The hedge maze, known in whispers as an unholy place, had many entrances, but never the same one twice. Or so the old stories claimed. It was said to rise and vanish with changes in the wind, guided by a darker will that turned the soil and twisted the vines. Within that maze lay the remnants of an ancient burial ground, the earth heavy with the presence of bones too old to count. Few dared to approach, and even fewer returned with minds intact. A single traveler trudged through the wilderness that night, a scholar by the name of Eleonora. Her boots were caked in mud from miles of damp, lonely road. She carried a lantern, its flame quivering in the damp air. Local legends had drawn her here, a compulsion born from an insatiable hunger for knowledge of the uncharted realms of existence. All day, she had searched for the rumored gateway into the maze. At dusk, she finally stumbled upon the ivy-choked arch, half hidden by dead trees whose bark crumbled at her slightest touch. A single step inside, and the wind seemed to shift. The archway behind her let out a groan, like an unearthly gate closing, and the path ahead stared back like a black maw, welcoming her to a realm of fear. She moved forward under the canopy of brambles. The hush in the air felt unnatural. No song of birds, no buzz of insects, only the low pulsing weight of her own heart. Even the crackling of her lantern's flame was absorbed by the dense walls of leaves. As she advanced, the lantern's light revealed flecks of stone markers, missing corners and inscriptions half devoured by moss. Tombstones, she realized. The further she went, the more they peeked through the roots entwining them. Some stones listed at odd angles, others were nearly consumed by the vines. It felt as if the entire place had been reclaimed by nature. But there was something more purposeful about it than simple overgrowth. Odd shapes glimmered among the foliage when the lantern's light flickered just so. At one point, Eleonora stared too long at what she thought might be a dagger or a chipped plaque. The object disappeared when the flame steadied, leaving her uncertain whether it had been real or some trick of her exhausted mind. Rounding a corner, she came upon a widening in the maze. The high living walls curved outward, forming a small courtyard. In various places sprouted cracked statues, marble angels with their faces chipped away, hooded figures clutching scrolls, and a stone maiden holding an empty bowl. The air carried a suffocating chill. Different from the ordinary chill of night, it was more like the sudden cold found in crypts. As she paused, uncertain of which path to take next, an anguished moan rippled through the hedges, coming from somewhere deep within the meandering pathways. Then it was gone, leaving her head pounding with the realization that she was not alone. The moaning sound, guttural and distant, propelled her to choose a path at random. Her heart hammered as she stepped through another arch of thorns into a corridor of foliage. The path darkened, overhead branches forming a nearly solid canopy. She held the lantern up high, casting a pale circle of light around her steps. The corners grew more frequent, twisting left and right in maddening succession. Thunder whispered on the horizon. The air tasted of rain, and the tension in the labyrinth felt electric, as though the creeping vines themselves could spring to life any moment. Setting her lantern down briefly, she pressed her ear to the hedges. She heard a faint rustling, like a whisper carried on a breeze. Though no breeze penetrated this green fortress, it sounded like voices, or perhaps the dead leaves stirring. Each second she lingered, her apprehension grew. When the first raindrop fell, she breathed a shaky sigh. Though the storm would bring darkness and difficulty, at least it might wash away the cloying hush. Yet the clouds above withheld their full fury, permitting only a gentle drizzle. Ahead, the hedge walls opened once more onto a broader clearing. This time, a deteriorated mausoleum emerged from the gloom. It was small and squat, halfway sinking into the earth, its broad marble steps coated in moss. Columns framing the entrance threatened to collapse under the weight of the creeping vines that choked them. At the base, skull carvings stared accusingly, as if warning intruders that they trod on sacred land. Encircling the mausoleum were numerous grave markers, their stone surfaces etched with ancient writing that set Eleonora's pulse racing. She recognized some partial runes from her studies, references to rites of passage, guardians of thresholds, and invocations of spirits. Her mind churned with curiosity, warring with the dread pooling in her stomach. Something glided across the near corner of her vision, a pale, wavering shape that flickered once in the lantern's glow, then vanished. She bit her lip to stifle a gasp. Her foot caught on a tree root, and she stumbled, nearly dropping the lantern. The spirit, or wraith, if that's what it was, had moved soundlessly, leaving a lingering sense of hushed sorrow. Carefully, she continued toward the mausoleum's entrance. Its iron doors, spotted with rust, stood ajar. A gust of cold, stale air swept out from the darkness within. She waited just beyond the threshold, uncertain if stepping inside would invite the mausoleum's hidden occupants to awaken. The drizzle intensified, and cracks of thunder rattled the hedges. Perhaps she could wait out the storm in some meager shelter. If she remained outside, she faced the threat of being lost amidst the labyrinth's tangles. Summoning her courage, she slipped through the door. Inside, the air was thick with decay, yet also charged with a spiritual heaviness. The lantern light exposed a cramped hall that descended a short set of steps into a crypt. The walls were lined with alcoves where coffins once might have sat, but many were empty, with only bits of shattered wood or scraps of cloth. Tangles of roots pierced through gaps in the ceiling and trailed down the walls. Water dripped from these openings, pooling on the floor in a murky puddle. The place smelled of old damp stone and something vaguely metallic, an unpleasant tang she couldn't quite place. She surveyed the space. Aside from the battered remains of the coffins, the crypt was devoid of obvious threats, yet her instincts prickled. She tried to swallow, but her throat felt tight. As the thunder rumbled overhead, she noticed something carved into the back wall, an array of symbols that repeated those out on the grave markers. There was an altar, its surface coated in a greasy layer of black residue. Above it, etched into the stone, was a depiction of a labyrinth. At its heart glowed a small figure, depicted in swirling lines, a silhouette of a spirit, or perhaps a captive soul. On the labyrinth's perimeter, ghostly silhouettes seemed to press inward. Although crudely done, the carving held a haunting power. Eleanor felt as though she stood in the very presence of the scene it portrayed. A labyrinth brimming with tormented spirits, all gathered around a solitary prisoner. She touched the stone, tracing the grooves. Her palms tingled, the sensation traveling up her arm as if the very walls vibrated with dormant energy. She pulled away, fear quickening her breath. A faint wail drifted from deeper within the crypt. She found a corridor branching off from the main chamber, leading farther under the earth. Though her instincts told her to leave, the presence of that ancient runic language planted a dangerous curiosity in her mind. Perhaps this passage led to the true core of the burial ground, the center of the labyrinth. If so, could she uncover the origins of the curse rumored to claim every soul foolish enough to enter? Resolute, she crept into the corridor. Her lantern cast shifting shadows on the stone walls, illusions that made it seem like figures flickered on the periphery of her vision. The corridor was choked with cobwebs that clung to her jacket and hair. Each step forward coaxed out an echo that reminded her how deeply underground she now walked. At length, she entered a wider hall. Its floor dipped in the center, forming a shallow basin. Along the walls were rusted sconces, each supporting a single black candle that had long since burned to stubs. Eleonora's lantern revealed more cryptic carvings, repetitions of the labyrinth motif, intermingled with depictions of hooded figures performing some dark ritual. In the center of the basin, water seeped in, forming a small pool. She knelt beside it, seeing her exhausted reflection in the rippling surface. Her face was ashen, eyes dark-circled, lips drawn tight. For a moment, she saw a second face in the water, pale, rotted, the skin stretched tight across bone. She jerked backward, nearly toppling into the water. When she regained her balance and glanced again, the image was gone. Then she heard it again, rustling or whispering, from a passage on the far side of the hall. She rose, pressing a hand to her racing heart. She could barely dampen the urge to run back out into the hedge maze, but the notion of being lost there in the storm brought no comfort. Lighting a small taper from her lantern, she moved forward again, suspecting she might need a second source of light if her lantern failed. She held it aloft, noticing the storm outside had intensified, and the trickle through the overhead cracks grew into a steady stream. Water pooled along the edges of the hall, splattering as it dripped from roots overhead. She made her way to a door of damp wood, which moaned on its hinges when she pushed it open. Beyond it, a staircase descended into a chamber lit by some unknown glow. Low, flickering lights licked the stone walls, dancing to a spectral rhythm. She extinguished her taper to preserve it, reclasped the lantern handle, and descended the steps. The corridor bent around until she emerged into an enormous cavern. Mist seeped from the earthen walls, and the floor was lined with ancient headstones sunk into the mud, enormous roots and vines snaking down from the labyrinth above, fed on the presence below. In the center stood a raised dais of polished black basalt. Its surface shimmered under the unearthly light, revealing a large symbol cut into the stone, a circle within a maze. Littered around were scattered bones, some bleached white, others half buried in the loam. Eleonora's breath quickened. She had glimpsed more than a few human skulls among the remains. A sudden wail echoed across the chamber, and in that instant, shapes emerged, wispy, translucent figures, drifting into view around the dais wraiths, each exuding cold malice. They floated in irregular patterns, as if tethered by unseen anchors. One drifted close enough for Eleonora to see. It wore a faint echo of an ancient robe. Its face was a blur of agony, eyes wide and empty. She took an involuntary step backward, lantern shaking in her hand. The wraith hissed soundlessly, and in its hollow eyes, she sensed a tortured desperation. The air chilled further, and the flame in her lantern sputtered, threatening to vanish. A swirl of motion behind her revealed more wraiths, emerging from the walls, from the fallen stones, from the cracks in the earth itself. Each one hovered, their features twisted in sorrow and rage. Their presence seemed to gather at the dais, as if compelled by something older than them all. She found herself drawn forward, despite her terror. The dais pulsed, almost like a heartbeat. She recalled the carved image in the mausoleum, showing a labyrinth with a figure trapped at its center. The wraiths were swirling around that same center, bound by some ancient darkness. Whatever lay at that dais might be the key to breaking their curse, or sealing it forever. She approached the raised platform, her teeth chattering from cold or sheer fear. The wraiths parted like a living veil, giving her room to climb the few steps up to the polished stone. Her eyes flicked to where the carved symbol lay. At the center of the pattern was a bowl-shaped depression, filled with what looked to be a dark liquid. A faint violet glow emanated from within. As her hand hovered near it, the wraiths let out an eerie chorus of sighs. She realized she was standing upon a painful site of rituals performed centuries ago. Perhaps witches or necromancers had once used sacrifices here to bind the restless souls to this domain. Their torment fed the labyrinth, causing it to shift and roam. She sensed that if she fled without touching the bowl, the entire cursed cycle would continue. Yet, to tamper with it could unleash an even graver doom. Her desire to free these souls, mingled with her scholar's curiosity, urged her to act. She siphoned her courage and reached out, fingertips brushing the dark, swirling fluid in the bowl. Where her skin touched, the fluid glowed brighter, and a jolt coursed through her body. The wraiths shrieked, a horrible cacophony. Darkness bled from the bowl, coursing across the dais and spreading into the soil. The entire cavern seemed to quake, and Eleonora felt a powerful pull, dragging her consciousness somewhere beyond mere sight. For an instant, her vision blurred. She saw a swirling blackness, felt heat and cold intermixed under her skin. In that delirium, she glimpsed a series of tall figures performing rites around this very dais, chanting in a dead language while bound captives screamed. Blood spilled, soaking the basalt until it gleamed with sacrificial torment. The spirit of the labyrinth drank that blood, forging unbreakable chains to the souls that died here. Then she saw the labyrinth's subsequent centuries, how it lured travelers, drawing them in to feed its insatiable hunger for life. One by one they perished, joining the realm of wandering wraiths, prisoners of the labyrinth's endless curse. With a sob, she jerked her fingers back. The bowl's fluid stopped glowing. The vision ceased, and she reeled, knees trembling. A hush fell behind her as the wraiths crowded close in anticipation. A single echoing voice spoke in her mind, neither male nor female. It asked one question: will you offer release, or shall we remain forever? Tears burned in her eyes. She set her lantern on the dais, raising her hands to face the wraiths. The question weighed heavily, as though the ghosts demanded an answer to an impossible riddle. Struggling to stand steady, she took a deep breath. "I want to help," she whispered. "I want to break this cycle." The air stirred with agonized recognition, the forms around her stilled, their ephemeral bodies trembling. Instinctually, she knew she had to complete a broken ritual, but inverted, offering freedom instead of imprisonment. She recalled scraps of knowledge from forbidden texts, quickening her heartbeat as she realized what must be done. She grabbed a small ceremonial dagger from one of the stone altars nearby. Its handle was encrusted with jade, its blade appearing to be the same obsidian-like material as the dais. Her reflection in the blade was that of a tormented soul, eyes lined with weary acceptance. Carefully, she held her free hand over the bowl of dark fluid. The fluid seemed to churn, anticipating. She inhaled sharply, summoning every last nerve, then pressed the dagger's edge against her palm. Blood seeped out. She let it drip into the bowl. The wraiths pulsed as a collective chaos, swirling around her in a frenzy. A resonant chime sounded, as though the labyrinth itself was voicing alarm or wonder. Lightning flashed overhead, the ground trembled, and through the cracks in the cavern's ceiling she saw the maze shifting, the hedges twitching as if alive. A mighty wind howled, funneling through the corridors above. Thunder boomed, shaking the earth. She felt a surge of renewed power vibrating under her feet. The labyrinth was fighting back, refusing to yield its captive souls. Summoning resolve, she cupped her bleeding hand over the swirling liquid again. The mixture now glowed fiercely, fragments of her own life force mingling with the labyrinth's dark residue. She began to speak in a voice that she did not fully recognize as her own, chanting words of release, of severing bonds. Some primal knowledge guided her lips, and the wraiths closed in, their forms fluctuating as if caught between existence and oblivion. The swirling energy reached a climax, and a thunderous crack split the air. The dais fractured along the etched symbol, sending arcs of violet light through the chamber. The bowl shattered, splattering a dark substance across the stones. In that final, blinding moment, she felt a wave wash over her. The wraiths cried out, part agony, part liberation, and then an immense silence, thick and absolute, swallowed everything. When she opened her eyes, she lay against the broken dais. The cavern had grown quiet, apart from the steady dripping of water. No wraiths hovered in the darkness. Where the dais had been, only a jagged pile of fractured basalt remained, ringed by the scattered bones which no longer seemed animated or cursed. merely remnants of a tragic history. Her palms still throbbed, and she saw her own blood drying on her skin. Wincing, she retrieved her lantern. Its flame had not extinguished, though it was flickering quietly. She tried to stand. Every muscle burned with fatigue, but she forced herself upright. A strange calm settled over the chamber, marking the end of a haunting presence. Slowly, she found her way back through the corridors and crypts. Retracing her steps by lantern light. She paused only once in the mausoleum's entrance to reclaim her breath. The storm was abating outside. Thunder still rumbled, but the rain had lessened to a gentle patter. Eleonora pushed open the rusted iron door. Upon exiting, she found that the hedges had shifted. The path was open, almost welcoming. An arch of gnarled vines displayed the moon beyond, and she only had to follow it. Too weary to ponder illusions, she trudged on. He passed the courtyard with the broken statues, their hollow eyes bearing silent witness to what had transpired. The moan that had once echoed through the labyrinth was silent now, replaced by a soft wind. Twists in the path no longer led her astray. Each time she encountered a fork, one of the routes appeared slightly clearer, less choked with vines. The dripping branches overhead parted, allowing starlight to guide her steps. In less time than she would have believed possible, she emerged back into the wilderness from which she'd come. She turned to see the entrance behind her. The ivy-choked archway was crumbling, its vines sloughing away as if rotting in fast forward. It collapsed soundlessly into itself, leaving only a mound of decaying vegetation. She stood there, breathing heavily, while the last hiss of wind died in the night. A sense of finality settled around her shoulders. She allowed herself a small, trembling smile. The weight of tormented souls no longer clung to the maze. Perhaps they had found their rest. She had gambled with secret rites, the ancient runes etched into her memory, and her own blood, shedding enough to fracture the bond that had held so many souls tethered in agony. Despite her battered spirit, she felt a strange measure of triumph. Knowledge had led her there, but compassion had freed her, and she suspected freed them. Exhaustion finally overcame her. She sank to her knees, let the lantern rest beside her, and sat on the cold, muddy ground. The clouds were parting, allowing a frail moonbeam to illuminate the night. She gazed upward, tears of relief and grief mingling on her cheeks. She remembered the wraiths' anguished cries and prayed they had found peace. The labyrinth, once a living entity steeped in darkness, seemed defeated. She wondered with a shiver whether it might someday rise again if stirred by fresh blood or wicked intent. But for now, at least, the shadows had receded. She forced herself back to her feet, unsteady but somewhat comforted by the gentle breeze that caressed her face. With the labyrinth dissolved behind her, she began her journey away from the cursed ground. Uncertain of her final destination, after another, she pressed onward through the wet grass, the hush of night broken only by her own ragged breathing. Even if the memory of this night's horrors would haunt her dreams, she knew she had accomplished a grave and holy work, setting the dead free. And should the twisting hedges ever sprout anew, she alone held the knowledge to stand against them again. Overhead, the moon broke free of a thick cloud, spilling pale light onto the swaying trees. In that luminosity, Eleonora beheld the countryside that stretched before her, vast, quiet, and saturated with the promise of rest. The labyrinth was, for the moment, at peace. She could feel it in the whitening of her knuckles as her grip on the lantern relaxed, in the gentle stirring of the night air through her damp hair. With her burden lifted, she dared to believe that by confronting the darkest corners of the ancient burial ground, she had allowed the light to reach what once was shrouded. She took a final backward glance at the uprooted vines. They lay in a stagnant heap, silent as a corpse that would never again walk. Then, lantern in hand, she carried herself onward, alone but resolute, disappearing into the moonlit distance.